All right, we have probably about an hour, hour and a half left of the seminar. What we're going to do is we're going to break this one down into two pieces. First one's going to be me, and then the second one's going to be Sveta, and then we'll reconvene with the other group for kind of a wrap up and prayer. So I'm mainly going to focus on leadership, expectations, and then a couple pointers as far as camp ministry and just church ministry overall. So raise your hand if you've made any New Year's resolutions, or if people still do that. All right, most people don't. Anybody care to share any? Leah?
Yeah.
You want to share? Don't want to share?
Okay, this is really simple, but my New Year's resolution was to be more thankful.
More thankful? Okay. Anybody else have any resolutions?
I want to be more disciplined this year.
Discipline? All right. All right, so I made a few, and a lot of people, they love to make New Year's resolutions. Most of them don't carry out with them. Don't know if there's a statistic, but I'll make one up. About 98% of all New Year's resolutions are not fulfilled, so you can write that down. So I made a few. One is to read the whole New Testament from scratch. Just read it and really dive into it, not just skim through it. The other one is to learn how to ride on a rail on a snowboard, meaning whole grind thing on a rail and not break my head or anything. And the other one is to be better at communicating, whether it's with my family, with camp, with our camp leadership group, with work, just anything, just be better at communicating. I think Nadia, who I've been working with at camp for the past however many years, she knows very well that I'm not very good at communicating, and she's at the point where she can pretty much read my mind. So that's my goal. But making goals is great, however, we tend to not stick with them. For example, about 5 years ago, we had a Planet Fitness open up in Vineland. It might have been even more. So new year, new me. Of course, they opened up around December, so I'm like, you know what, I'm going to sign up. That's my New Year's resolution. So I signed up. My keys are over there. So for about 5 years, I've carried this keychain here, and that's my extent of going to the gym. I probably went like 5 times. Yeah, thanks. So, barely. They might have been all in that January. So New Year's resolutions are great, goals are great, but if they are not met, or if you don't actually work to strive them, they're pointless. So like goals, we also have expectations that we want to try to meet. So there's expectations when we go to camp, when we do any type of ministry, but one thing that we often forget is that there's different levels of expectations for different perspectives of expectations. So what are 3 perspectives that people in camp, or what are 3 sides to expectations at camp, or who do they come from? I might have not phrased that right. So we have the staff, meaning us, the leadership team. We have our expectations for that week or that month, or however long you're going on your missionary trip or in your ministry. We have the campers in the case of camp, or the people who are being loved on, the people who are pretty much we're dedicated to. And then sometimes there isn't this kind of side to the expectation, but in our case, we have parents. So every time that I go to camp personally, I set expectations where I think like, oh, this is going to be the best camp year so far. This is going to be great. We have all these games, things like that. I'm sure that the campers are like, this is going to be awesome. I get to see my friends, blah, 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 blah. And then parents are like, great, I have a week away from my kids. I can finally relax, sleep. I don't have to clean up nonstop. So what are some expectations that we set as the staff when we're going into camp? What are the week, the month before camp? What do you think about? What do you look forward to? Delivering the message.
Connecting with the kids.
Connecting with kids.
Decorating.
Decorating? Okay.
No more decorating. The worship.
The worship, all right. meet new people, maybe. Reconnect with the leaders that are maybe from Ohio that you don't see very often, or from other states. So these are the ones that I wrote down. To teach the gospel. My expectation when I come there is I expect to be exhausted, and at the same time I expect myself to be full of energy. I expect myself to be pumped to serve for that week. I know that I'll fellowship with the staff, evangelize to the campers. I'll meet new people, whether it's grow closer with the team, who are just starting to be the leaders or it's their first year, grow closer with the camp staff if we're renting the campground, which we do at Camp Pearl. And then my expectation is to see the campers come to Christ. I think for the most part, these few expectations are similar throughout anybody that's involved in this ministry. What about with campers? We have some here that were campers last year, 2 years ago, or they still are. What are some expectations? Fun. All right. Friends. Pranks. All right. Yeah. Okay. So here's the ones that I came up with. I haven't been a camper for a while, but you see old friends, you meet new friends, you stay up all night, you go pranking, you learn about Christ. Notice how I didn't put that first, because I think most of the time when campers come, it's not the number one thing on their priorities, and I think that's just, let's be real, it's just how it is. Eat a lot of junk food. We have someone in here that managed to have a suitcase full of junk food that came to one of the camps. I'm not going to say who. Get in trouble and be away from home. And I'll touch on the be away from home part a little later because it's actually a very important part to what we do at the camp. And then the third perspective is parents. What kind of expectations do parents set for the camp when they're letting their kids go? Kids come back like angels, all right? Safety, behavior. They maybe accept Christ, grow in their faith. All right, so I wrote a week away from the kids because I talked to a lot of parents and they're always pumped about that. They have the expectation that their kids will be safe while at the campground, and their kids will have fun at the camp, that's a given, and the kids will grow in their faith. So we have three sets of expectations, or from three different perspectives, but only one of the sets of expectations is our responsibility, or something that we can plan out and give to the other groups. So in other words, we as staff, our responsibility is one, fulfill our expectations or try our best to fulfill them. But more importantly, we need to make sure that, not everything, but most of the things here, primarily here, are met. And the part that you could say stinks or you might say is great about being on staff is the fact that our dedication leads to the expectations of the campers and parents and the churches to be met. So what to expect with the leadership role. A lot of us have been leaders for a very long time. How many of you have been leaders for over 5 years? Just raise your hand. All right. 3 years. Okay. 2 years? Okay, 1 year. So I'll say probably 70% of you have been in a leadership role at a camp. Or you might be in a leadership role at VBS or Sunday school. So you'll know where I'm coming from with most of this. However, throughout the seminar, one thing I ask you to do is just think about where you apply in these slides, where you are, and maybe evaluate yourself if maybe, okay, I'm actually a part of this statistic, or if I actually need to change this about myself, or maybe I'm glad I'm doing this and maybe I can encourage other people to do that. So with camp, anything really, you have a lot of physical and emotional stress throughout the week. And to that I say, praise the Lord. It's actually great that you will be stressed, that you will be concerned and tired, because that means that you're serving. You're working hard in your ministry, and the gospel calls us to give our all. He calls us to pretty much dedicate ourselves and be the best that we can be in our ministry. And if you go to camp and you come out with more energy than you came with, you probably did something wrong or you didn't do enough. So you might need to realign the expectations that you set yourself when coming to camp. Like I said, with our opportunity to serve comes a responsibility for us to prioritize the expectations of the parents and of the kids that we are serving, and put our expectations in the back burner, because very often something will drop out. Maybe your expectation was to spend more time with the leaders, to hang out more with them, but then you realize, oh wait, I need to spend 24/7 with the kids. So that might fall off, but the safety of your kids is increased, and they feel better being around you, and they feel like they can open up to you. You've developed a better relationship with them. So realigning your expectations is crucial, because you're being selfless. You are dedicating yourself to that ministry. One thing that I will say is I don't have any experience with missionary like kids camps. That is one thing that I hope I can change in the future, but that's where Sveta will come in. She'll explain that better. And any questions that you have about missionary trips, you can come to her. But sadly, I don't have any experience. But I do know for a fact that they're completely different and require different type of preparation. A lot of them are the same, however, there's a lot of different aspects within cultural barriers, within just logistics, things like that are different. And one thing that I noticed when I led an actual group at camp is I had an expectation of my kids will know the basics of the gospel, because here I'm going to a church camp. Most of the campers are believers. They should know this type of stuff, right? I mean, they go to Sunday school, things like that. One thing I realized is I needed to adjust my lessons because, well, this kid, let's call him Bob, he goes to Sunday school, but his parents are Christian, or he's forced to go to Sunday school, so he doesn't really care. So very often it's very important to take an outlook on your lesson as my kids, they maybe know the basics, but they don't know the actual theme. So just trace yourself back or take a step back and go over the broad picture before presenting or before your lesson, or see how you can develop your lesson in a way where it's very just broad in the beginning or in the first, second day of your lesson. And very often the lesson books that you're provided, unless you're writing them, unless you're in that position where you're writing lessons, it will start off with a general broad overview of the theme and then go into more details. So one thing that we often don't talk about is what happens after camp. And this year I actually I observed firsthand of the aftermath of camps, or not so much the aftermath, more of where the leader is, or where the counselor, the coordinator, just anybody involved in the camp, where they are in the lives of the kids after the camp. So our goal as the camp staff, what's our goal?
Share the gospel.
Share the gospel. Connect. All right, so I wrote, bring the kids to Christ and demonstrate the love that Christ has shown us to the campers. One thing that we are very fortunate about is the fact that we have the community that we have here. We have a community. We have the convention, which is a mix of all these churches into one, and then we have an opportunity like this where churches from the tri-state area, even further than the tri-state, can come together. We can learn about this ministry, and then we have conventions, we have conferences. And that's one thing that we need to show to these kids, that there's more to the life of being a Christian, of being a believer, than being in church on Sundays and then going back to the everyday grind. The relationships that we build at camp last forever, and they're the things that the campers see and they follow for life. So I'm pretty sure I've grown up with majority of you here, well, not majority, but a good portion of you here I've grown up with from Camp Pearl, from working different ministries together, and now we end up working in camps together. And I think that's all because we were grounded in the same faith, and we were grounded in this community. And one thing that we need to establish with these campers, especially when they graduate, is, hey, you're done with kids camp, that's great, but there's this whole wide, broad thing of ministries, things that you can join now that you're done with camp. You can, one, become a leader, or you can join your VBS group, or maybe some other ministries in your church. But one thing that I feel like we fail very often is the follow-up with the kids. Maybe a text message once in a while, hey, how are you doing? How are you in your faith? Or, hey, I'm praying for you. I think that's one thing that I encourage all of you to do, even outside of camp. If you have someone in your church, someone in your youth, that you see they might be struggling, or they're new to the faith, a little text message or a phone call will go such a long way. And you never know what that text message could really mean to that person. One thing that we did this year, which I really appreciated, was we collected the list of everyone that repented from last year's kids camp. And then we had a whole list. And then that list went to pastors. And then that list went to Danichkin, who is he's in charge of the UBC youth. And then that list was prayed over. And at our spring or fall youth conference, the people that attended the conference and that repented at kids camp, they went up on stage, they were given a gift, and they were prayed over. So I think that's great that we're starting to take camp outside of that week and involving the people that are around us, and involving the kids that repented and bringing them closer into the community. We're building up a community that supersedes us. What I mean by that is the people that led camp 10 years ago are, for the most part, no longer in the picture, and the people that were in camp 10 years ago are now leading it. Our responsibility is to build the kingdom, and our responsibility is to have someone to take over for us when we are done being leaders, when we move to the next part of our lives. And that's exactly what we're doing, one, here, and what we're doing when we evangelize and we teach these kids at the campground, at the camp. Pretty much said that. All right, so some of you remember the camp theme from last year. One thing I keep thinking about, especially in my church, because we have a lot of younger kids, is kids listen and they absorb everything. They're like sponges. So what I did was I got some good things, and then I have some bad things. Hang out with the youth, Bible studies, prayer, you being around them, setting a good example. The bad stuff. You guys know what the bad stuff is. And here's a kid. I would have drawn a face, but I have to give the sponge back. So, very simple illustration, but about 50% of the water is sucked up and pouring back in. But we see that these kids will absorb the good stuff. Oops, very well, sorry, Gianna. I'm guessing. I mean,
I'll be
it's your church. But they equally as well absorb the bad stuff. So as leaders, as the youth in our church, we need to make sure that we stay responsible and that we're very conscious of what we do, what we say, how we act within the window of the camp. That's 7 days or the week, the 2 weeks, whatever camp you have, or the day camp. But also outside of camp. The kids at my church, they absorb everything. Prime example, we have a kid in our church, really young kid. At some point, someone called him a poopy head. So therefore, every time that he sees me, he says, "Hey David, you're a poopy head." All right, so prime example. Watch what you say to the kids, because they'll start repeating it, or worse, if they see you doing something that's bad, they'll start copying you, and then that might spring into something more. And as leaders, as people in a role of leadership, we have to answer for everything that we teach these kids, either to parents or to other staff and so on. So my pastor, he always says this one thing whenever we really go anywhere, whenever I talk to him. He always says, you represent your church wherever you are, whether at conferences or at work or anywhere, so represent it well. Well, we represent our Heavenly Father, we represent our church, our convention, our community, so whatever we do, let's make sure that we're very conscious and we represent it well. So, I don't know if I have enough copies. I have everyone's emails, so I will email it out. What I'm going to do right now is pass out a few of these pages. Sveta was nice enough to provide me 14 attributes of a good leader. For the sake of time, I don't think I'm going to go through all of them, but you can read over them while I present or I continue. Huh? So I encourage all of you to go through all these attributes and see where you tie in, where there's some room for improvement, and where you can spread this and where you can encourage others to change or to possibly encourage yourself to change. There's 14, once again, I'm not gonna go through them, but I think a recipe for a successful camp and a successful leadership kind of ministry is have a Christ-centered theme, which is a given. Whatever we do, we need to make sure that it's Christ-centered. We also need to make sure that we have a dedicated, well-prepared team, which is what we're grooming, what we're growing in, and what we're preparing for. And with those two things, we'll have a safe, fun, Christ-oriented camp that we can equip the campers to grow in their faith and accept Christ. I have a quote here from Mother Teresa. None of us, including me, ever do great things, but we can all do small things with great love, and together we can do something wonderful. As Sasha really kind of hammered on today, the importance of working as a team. We all have our strong suits, we all have things that we're not so good at, and that's why there's so many of us. We have over 60 people here today that want to be involved, want to grow in this ministry, want to grow in our faith, and we all are small pieces that build the puzzle. And one thing that I think is critical in order for all this to work is for us to be humble, for us to know ourselves, to know what we're capable of, to know our hearts, and then proceed with that knowledge. So I encourage every single one of you to pray about this ministry, pray about your future endeavors, either in this ministry or other ministries throughout your church, convention, and take a second to reflect on where you are in your faith, where you are in your ministry, if there's anything that you want to change, if there's anything that you think you're good at, and just make sure that you're doing everything with a pure heart, and your goal is to bring these kids to repentance in a very safe and healthy environment. That's pretty much it for me. One thing I wanted to change, add is, if you're interested, you can follow us for all the opportunities within the convention at those 2 pages. UBC for Youth, that's our youth convention Instagram page, and this is our Camp Pro page. We'll be posting information very shortly about that. Sveta's going to go over her ministry opportunities and kind of talk about her side of the seminar. One thing that I will add somewhere in that area, I'm going to add a little sign-up sheet for anybody that's interested in being a leader for our Camp Pro Kids Camp. What we're trying to do is make sure that we stay very organized and develop a process to make sure that the leaders that we have are, one, well-equipped, and they're ready to serve, and meaning in their spiritual lives, they're ready to serve. Just overall, we want to make sure that we have the best group that we could possibly pick. So I'll leave a sign-up sheet there. Make sure that you follow the Instagram pages to be up to date with any notifications. And yeah, if you have any questions, please let me know, and then we'll go from there.